And welcome to day 3 of the VID21 conference. My name is Julia, still the creator and host, and you are joining a global conversation this morning. It is 8 a.m. here in Melbourne, wherever you are in the world. Welcome. We are in for a bit of a treat this morning. We are joined by our wonderful sponsors, the Change Management Institute. I have been in and around the Change Management Institute for a number of years, a massive advocate of change and being able to lead change effectively, most importantly, the people side of change. And I think it's fair to say that regardless of where you were where you are in the world last year, we all experienced a significant amount of change, whether that was planned or unplanned. So we're going to dig into that a little bit in this session. And we're also going to, more importantly, talk about the future, because it's a new year, it's 2021. Certainly here in Australia, things are feeling a little bit more positive than they were last year, but it's fair to say that the change hasn't finished. I can still get the sense that there is going to be more to come. So in this session, we're talking about, how we found ourselves in this living case study for change last year. What are we going to do this year? What are the learnings that we want to carry forward? And we're joined by a wonderful panel of speakers. So the Change Management Institute, for people that aren't familiar, is a peak body of change practitioners around the world. We're joined by the wonderful Cindy Smith from Canada, who has deep experience in building organizational and individual change management capability, as well as delivering project-based change management outcomes and benefits. She's spent more than 25 years guiding others through disruption and adaptation, mostly in the financial services sector. We're also joined by Liam Crosdale, who I think is in the UK. Liam is an accomplished professional specializing in change management, organizational development and leadership development. Throughout his career, he's led global change initiatives, leading organizations through periods of intense change, working with leaders and managers to find new ways to inspire and motivate, or working with individuals to unlock their strengths and seize their potential. Throughout his work, he applies a human-centered approach to understanding complex human dynamics and their influence on the overall workplace experience. And we've also got Lydia Harris, who is in New Zealand. Lydia is a Change Management Institute accredited Change Master. Lydia has been consulting in change management for over 15 years across New Zealand and Australia in a variety of sectors. She has experience in portfolio management, transformation, enterprise resource planning, culture and behaviour initiatives, and in the past few years has been helping organisations build change management maturity through the invention of their change strategy, through the building of leadership capability and frameworks. And lastly, we've got Len Ball. Len's career is about engaging and enabling people to change how to think, behave and work. He specialises in leading transformation initiatives using a structured approach backed with extensive communications experience, meeting people, process and technology projects where the needs are. He has helped organisations realise better adoption rates, decrease risk and build change maturity in evolving business environments. So it's fair to say it doesn't matter where you are in the world, we have an insight from that neck of the woods. And Cindy, I'm going to hand over to you to just do a short presentation of some of the Change Management Institute's observations from last year, and then we're going to get into a panel discussion.
Thanks, Julia. Very happy to be here today to represent the Change Management Institute along with my peers. Okay, these quotes provide a taste of the experiences felt in 2020 and the world we have been living in, but also the world we've been practicing change within. For example, the crisis has forced every company into a massive experiment in how to be more nimble, flexible, and fast. Well, we can't argue with that. The amount of change employees can absorb without fatigue, the negative reactions to change, such as burnout, frustration, or apathy, has plummeted at a time when more change is precisely what organizations need in order to reset. 2021 will be the year of transition. Barring any unexpected catastrophes, individuals, businesses, and society can start to look forward to shaping their futures rather than just grinding through the present. This is in a year where we saw a deadly virus that spread rapidly across continents due to the open borders and globalization that we've so taken for granted. We witnessed unprecedented responses to saving human lives, including the closing of borders, the grounding of aircrafts and cruise liners. We saw the closing of businesses and enforced stay-at-home policies where only essential services such as food and medical supplies could be accessed. Businesses closed due to the sudden loss of revenue and unexpected large-scale redundancies in previously blooming sectors that followed. Government stepped in with a raft of unparalleled measures to keep economies afloat. 2020 was characterized by an unprecedented appreciation for and reliance on the health sector as they came to know how to treat and support those with the virus, all while putting themselves in danger. And against this backdrop, we saw examples of division in our societies come to the surface, with greater desire for change and social equity. We also learned through stopping non-essential industries that we can have a positive impact on our environment and on our planet. It was indeed a year of seismic change and the context for which we're living now. At an individual level, we experienced fear and anxiety about simple activities like catching the bus or being in the office or anywhere we were exposed to others in close proximity. We learned to use new technologies quickly as a way of staying in touch no matter what our age. Our older and more vulnerable experienced social and physical isolation on a scale not previously imagined. Children were sent home from school to be schooled by parents. Exercise was limited to outdoors and at a distance from others. And many worked from home with unfamiliar systems, processes, and very different routines. And so we questioned everything that had previously been normal, including the way we treat others and our own environment, be it family, work, community, or our planet. So what did we learn from all of this? 2020 was defined by a sense of fragility and unpredictability. We were living in a historical moment with private choices dominated by the events that were happening around us. Not just the pandemic, but also the political landscapes, social justice movements such as Black Lives Matter, and the climate change movement. As routines and the daily hum of people's lives were disrupted, people discovered that routines sustain them and that taking care of ourselves is elemental. Everything from basic sanitation and washing our hands to getting fresh air and exercise, we learned to tune into our mental health and the mental health of those around us, and wellness has become a part of our focus. We discovered that we can quickly change and learn many new things, often from scratch. And 2020 accelerated the fourth industrial revolution. We learned how to use technology, teach and shop online, and digitally connect, for example, to gain medical support without visiting the doctor's office. And we also encountered polarity. Some businesses thrived while others collapsed. Some skills were in demand while others were redundant. Some political leaders demonstrated clear leadership while others struggled with the clarity needed to lead a nation through this. Some decried the science of the pandemic while others collaborated to develop and fast-track vaccines. Trends such as digital transformation were accelerated while others such as international travel and migration to cities was decelerated. So what do employees need in these times, and what can change professionals do to assist employees? Based on research by the Neuro Leadership Institute, it indicates the profound impact that the pandemic has had on employees. Working remotely, a loss of revenue, and virtual learning attributed to employees feeling threatened, anxious, and having difficulty focusing. The research revealed that employees right now need certainty, relatedness, and fairness. They look to their leaders as role models for transparency, clarity, and for peer and technological support. Change Management Institute sees this as an insightful reminder to change practitioners to actively recognize their new operating context and not revert to what is familiar. There will likely continue to be fear and anxiety in the workplace in the coming year. The return to work from lockdown situations trusting the vaccines, and continuing to care for loved ones will impact stress levels at an individual level. Therefore, actively managing emotion and a focus on empathy and how people are feeling, combined with change coaching and leadership support, are likely to be especially required of change managers in 2021. What might 2021 have in store? McKinsey and Gartner predict that 2021 will be a year of transition and further change off the back of 2020. As organizations move from their initial pandemic responses to more sustainable operations, they're trying to build resilience into everything, from strategy to work design, so as to enable the organization, its leaderships and employees to sense and respond to change repeatedly. They suggest 2021 will see the return of consumer confidence, a bounce back of leisure travel, but lagging business travel, and a wave of innovation and entrepreneurs sparked by the crisis. But there is now also opportunity for social, political, and economic dialogue to value our environment and focus on collaboration and inclusion of all, no matter our differences. There have been some great examples in 2020. Will these be maintained and leveraged in 2021? It's up to us. The top priorities for HR leaders in 2021 are to adapt their business models and capabilities to be more diverse and flexible to meet the changes in the market. This includes building critical skills and competencies in a more agile way and a focus on organizational redesign and change management. What does this mean for change professionals in 2021? You will need to be digitally and data savvy, embracing new technologies and using data to inform design and decision making. You need creative and visual communications. We anticipate less requirement for lengthy report format deliverables and more dashboard style digital communication across audience groups. We need to be able to demonstrate depth and breadth of change across all our change competencies. We need to be adaptive and able to design for different business situations and needs. And we need to be coaches and facilitators of change with strong partnering skills with business leaders of all levels. We need to focus on the volume of change and the potential for change fatigue. And we need to adjust the pace to optimize absorption in 2021. And we need to be a role model. We need to role model a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and ensure everybody has a voice and that is reflected in the work that we do. Let's listen to our panel members now deal with specific questions about 2020 and 2021. Thank you.
If I could just ask the rest of the panelists to unmute themselves.
Sure, can you hear me?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lydia. The thing where I want to start is what were your observations and the impact of last year on organisations, and how can we contribute and support and enable ongoing change in 2021?
Yeah. Well, it was a dynamic, crazy 2020, and it's still going in 2021. So much radical change right across the world, which has impacted individuals and organisations in so many ways. So I think it's important for us to recognise that you can do everything perfectly in a working world. So on your change initiatives, you can strategize, you can plan, you can think, you can prepare, and yet there are always going to be things outside of your control, regardless of your risk profile. So in the words of Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. And that's exactly what happened here. The direction we were heading in was suddenly shunted left with COVID. And what was interesting, and regardless of the anxiety of the situation, is that for all of us who were thrust into an entirely new operating world, we were suddenly paddling in a waka or a canoe in the same direction right across the world. And each waka was different. Some wakas had whole whānau or families in them. Some were paddling on their own. Some had resources and money. Some were barely keeping afloat. But regardless of having a paddle or not, that tide was taking us all in the same direction, an unknown direction of not knowing how it would play out. And that created anxiety and fear. Fear of losing jobs, fear of becoming sick or losing loved ones, which for some became a reality, fear of being alone, fear of coping while schooling the kids, fear of not earning money to pay the bills, fear of not being able to see the end. And suddenly organizations and leaders were thrown into chaos. It thrust us into a world of connection without connection. And obviously this had massive impact on organizations and individuals having to, step up and adapt to that. So some of the impacts that I saw in New Zealand and right around the world as well. So priorities and focus. Organizations had to quickly pivot on their priorities. We had to determine what we could let go of, what could be paused, what we continue, and how would we resource that. Organizations had to remobilize and divert change resource to work on setting up the organization to operate under the new model. And we saw longer term cost cutting measures as well. We saw a lot of change contractors in the government sector move to fixed term or perm and more recruitment freezes. And cost cutting also included giving people the option of working and flexibility of working less hours, which took the pressure off companies financially and allowed people to support their whānau, their families. And not all were lucky though, and we still have, and had a lot of people struggling around the world as well. And working from home brings its own challenges. So aside from the swift setup, people were having to homeschool their children and come into grips with new technology being deployed to support. The organisation I was working in was in the middle of a 365 implementation when COVID hit, and that was meant to be a soft implementation. Well, that changed pretty quickly. For our organisation, suddenly it was mandatory, and we had to quickly adapt and adopt working virtually, which, as you know, and we've had some technical issues this morning, has its own and at time hilarious moments. I saw a meme the other day that said that virtual meetings are basically modern seances. So, Julia, are you there? Make a sound if you can hear us. We can't see you. Can you hear us? Which is so true, right? Just some of the other impacts of 2020, on leadership was a big thing. We know that leaders have two hats, having to deal with their own personal experience while supporting their people through change. And leaders had to become a lot more visible, checking in one-on-one communications, communicating more often, and a big focus on well-being. But you know what? People do step up in a crisis. The human element really came through. Leaders were having to be more authentic and open than ever. They were having to let people into their lives, through this virtual connection that we're having right now. We were seeing how people lived, meeting their families, looking at that patch of lawn that they were so proud of, the pause when they had to let the dog in, or the crying child that needed a cuddle. The korero, so the conversations became real. And the impact meant that we'd be having to become human beings, even though we are human beings, but more about human beings with a higher level of empathy. And that hero leadership of command and control just doesn't work in this situation. Overall, I think it's been really positive for leadership. It's been a big and fast shift for organizations to get a handle on. And as such, guidance and support for leadership capability has really grown to focus on this. Employee wellbeing has never been so important. And for us in the Change Management Institute, we've had to shift really quickly from face-to-face workshops to events online. And the situation has driven demand for digitization and collaboration, whether that's Zoom, webinars, podcasts, those kinds of things. The first webinar in New Zealand chapter, our New Zealand chapter last year we did in May, was actually on the impact of COVID and what this meant for change management, which was timely and topical and resonated with a lot of people. And it also means that we're able to broaden our reach. We're now thinking global connection as opposed to just our country and some of our events, which is fantastic. But you still can't beat that face-to-face interaction and networking that you get with real connection.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that certainly through a lot of the conversations that we've had through VID21 and the people that were at VID19 last year as well, that there's some people experiencing massive change, and then sometimes change can just be as simple as being online for the first time, or having to understand how to use trying to work with your laptop on a shoebox. And there's been a whole spectrum of change over the last 12 months that is I think we've all done a wonderful job at doing. And it's a nice segue to Liam, if I can move to you, which is the consequences of 2020 felt for some time, the opportunities you see as change makers and the change profession of organizations in general. So, last year will have a lasting impact. So what do you see coming in that respect?
So yeah, I absolutely agree with the points that Lydia had called out in terms of what had happened last year and the quick transition that we've all had to make in such a short period of time. For me, from a change maker perspective, I absolutely see opportunities for us. And, I've got some examples where I am now sitting at the table with senior leaders, helping them think about the people impact. These are questions or topics that weren't really discussed previously, and they're taking a more proactive approach and really leaning on change practitioners and valuing the value that we add, becoming a trusted advisor. So again, I'm working with leaders on a one-to-one basis, helping them think about how they could be more authentic. And to the point that Lydia had made earlier, they are letting folks into their lives. They're meeting their kids, their pets, their homes, and just seeing them in a day-to-day life. And again, for most of the leaders, when the pandemic had initially started and the transition to remote working, it was new for them. They were suited and booted every day, and we as employees had the opportunity to see our leaders in a different setting where it felt more relaxed, it felt more organic, and you were able to build that personal relationship where there may have been barriers in the past. However, I do also think that there are risks as well associated to this for us as change makers. I've transitioned from one company in the US and I'm back in the UK now as a consultant. I'm working with a particular client, and I heard a leader mention to his senior leadership team that I would be, myself as the change practitioner, would be leading the change. And again, it's just being very clear as change practitioners to ensure that we're being realistic with the expectation. And I quickly and politely shut that conversation down and advised the leader that and his team that I am not here to lead the change as such, but I'm here to enable and support and guide. So there is this risk that change professionals will be leading change going forward. And I strongly encourage us as change professionals to ensure that that responsibility remains with the leader. From a profession standpoint, I think that there'll be an increase in change capability at various levels and various roles. Leaders, project managers, employees, etc. I'm seeing more and more technical roles requiring change management experience and capabilities. And again, as a consultant, I'm working with various different clients, helping them build out that change capability at the various different levels. And really thinking about the lessons that we've learned over the past few years and developing those transitional, hybrid ways of working and so forth. And again, for our profession, I do see a risk, dare I call it out. I see project managers and HR professionals and other professionals in this space who had supported the transition, to remote working or reviewing strategic priorities during the pandemic, and effectively working on change initiatives, and those individuals going out calling themselves change professionals. And I absolutely see nothing wrong with it. However, I would advise change professionals in this space to, again, just ensure that we're supporting and coaching those individuals, and again, not letting them go off on a tangent, going out to market advising that they're change professionals, and in fact they're not. So that's something that we as change professionals need to be mindful of. From an organizational perspective, I would say, again, I see organizations really focusing on change capability, and I can't stress it enough, getting more and more employees involved. So a strong appreciation for employee engagement. For me, over the past year, working with various organizations, I've seen this. I've seen curiosity, experimentation, and exploration at its best. And I think organizations should absolutely continue to move in that direction, trying new things and experimenting. And also I've seen that impact the cultural change as well within organizations. You know, I mentioned earlier around leaders being more vulnerable, you know, reaching out to Lydia's point around reaching out to employees, making that personal connection. I'm absolutely loving it. And again, just from a risk perspective, I would say something that we need to consider again as change professionals, and when we're working with leaders and as organizations start to think about transitioning to a face-to-face environment, it's just being mindful that we don't slip back into old ways of working. I'm mindful that there's been a lot of great lessons learned, and I would hate for us to you know, for us to go back to our old ways of working, letting go of all of the great stuff and the great lessons that we've captured during this period. So just ensuring that our old ways of working, you know, isn't stifling creativity, curiosity, and all the great work that we've done in this space.
Thanks so much. And so many key takeouts. And I know certainly as a project practitioner more than a change practitioner, I certainly echo your thoughts in understanding, you know, where the experience versus the expertise sort of overlaps. And it's fair to say we've all experienced change, but the expertise that we maybe have in the mechanics of, you know, taking people from awareness, you know, all the way through to sort of the adoption of the change, that it is a journey that change managers are experts in, even though we all have experiences and stories, good and bad, about what that change may look, or what that change may look like and how to manage it effectively. Len, I'm going to jump to you. What were some of the achievements you've observed in how individuals deal with change in the past year, and how could it alter the actions change makers might take in the future?
I think first and foremost, there's a contextual background here that's important. And the initial realization that a lot of companies and their playbooks weren't really suited to the pandemic, and therefore the fallout of things like lockdowns, remote work, impacts to revenue, obviously the very real health concerns associated, really shifted a kind of business as usual approach into survival. And in that mode, I think the change discipline's level of priority for a lot of leaders, at least, you know, from my observations here in Canada, was a bit more subdued. But those companies who were able to achieve stability, the next step was really to become future ready, and kind of pushed change work into, at least again, from my observations, kind of feels like a period of corporate renaissance, shifting quickly from a nice to have or even a great to have into need to have. And in this environment, the idea of reshaping and rebuilding has really become a central focus for many businesses, and therefore, in fact, many people. And managing change is a big component of really doing that well. So in the sense of we're all in this together, I think it's played a significant role in influencing people to reconsider, for one, how we share information. So I've seen folks on many teams and committees who have been otherwise firmly entrenched in ways of working start to begin to relax previously held notions of you know, things like protectionism, and becoming much more open to working together, participating in something new, and really sharing what they know a bit more freely. And so working for a college recently here in Toronto, a lot of the leaders had to retool programs for a digital remote work environment really quickly, adjust to new learning fast to bring in and roll out health and safety COVID protocols, as well as updating teaching practices. And to be fair, they couldn't really do it, to borrow Lydia's point, through a command and control approach. There weren't going to be any heroes, and so the wheels really started turning. And I think this has also been one of the strongest instances where I've seen people become more willing to ask for help. Many leaders have stepped up to encourage flexibility in approaches to work, you know, especially in remote work environments, and the challenges of no longer so a work-life balance, but more of like a work-life integration. And at the same time, taking care of ourselves and others, you know, that general wellness, that embrace of empathy, and focus on self-care. And I think in part because we've all gotten better at talking more openly about these things and their importance in the workplace. So recognizing that we can each change and learn quickly is a really key achievement that I've seen, and an important motivator for becoming more future ready. And so I think for the most part, there's an increasing sense of confidence for those who've experienced hardship and have been able to come out on the other end. The one thing that I do want, and I'll add this as kind of a caveat, is, talking about all in this together can often be a sentiment that is shared inequitably. And so the last example that I raised for sure doesn't include things like restaurant owners or those who have had family and friends really impacted from a health perspective through COVID. For instance, data on the pandemic from sources like The Economist and certainly many others show that women have been negatively impacted more than men, and that job losses and other hardships are disproportionately impacting those of lower economic standing. One thing to keep in mind is that if you look at economic impacts through the pandemic as disastrous globally, at the same time, household net worth in Canada rose by about 600 billion in the first 6 months of the crisis. So I think one of the learnings, and I would still describe it as an achievement, is keeping our objectivity intact and recognizing that that is just as important as some of these new achievements. And so if I can continue with what I think the second part of the question was, how can we alter actions, or how can change makers alter actions based on some of these achievements? I think one of the most relevant is going to be how we manage collective displacement. And I think keeping attention on that is likely to continue through 2021. Because the pandemic has left so many people disconnected from what they would otherwise consider familiar, I think we'll all be challenged to find new ways to connect and build bridges, but at a distance. And so from different social contexts as well as spatial ones. Another area where I think we can alter actions is in stakeholder management. It probably goes without saying that it's not as sexy as things like digital transformation and strategic analytics. But I do think the various elements that impact it, like emotional intelligence, prioritization of work, moving through the different aspects of crisis management, really need to be practiced in tandem to see practical outcomes. And for me, change management strategies and tactics are often built around the interplay between many of these different elements. And so if I could just distill that a little bit further, I do still catch references to soft skills as an afterthought. And I think through adjusting to changes through the pandemic, and with these skills really now starting to be highlighted and being brought to the forefront, I think they can be better described as essential strategic capabilities. And so I think as change practitioners or change enthusiasts, or however we want to characterize what we do, there's an opportunity to anchor that shift in the face of increasing headwinds and future change. I also think building our resilience and the recognition of individual ability to learn and change over the past year may make leaders more initially receptive to the ongoing value of change management. So really selling the value prop. And that may present more opportunity for change makers to influence and help to increasingly build change maturity within various organizations. Another consideration is that we've been forced to adjust, and in many instances have proven how resilient we can be. And I would say that even more so when experiences change collectively. But I do think there's the important question to raise of what is the cost of having gone through or continuing to go through this. It's not a reflection on financial so much, but on the impact that so much change can have on well-being and mental state. And most people that I know are working, who are continuing to work in a remote work environment, are working more hours than before, under more pressure than before, and certainly with fewer outlets to help manage them. So practicing flexibility, I think, is likely to play a strong role this year. And again, it's something that change makers can play a really important role in strengthening. And just to look at that from a slightly different angle, I think upskilling is going to continue to play an even more impactful role across the board. And I think this is an advantage to the change discipline overall, simply because there are so many diverse groups recognizing the need to understand how to lead through change effectively. And more than I think before, change is being seen less and less of a once and done, and more of sort of a stage in an ongoing process. And so if I could, if I could reference Liam's point, we do have this real opportunity to ensure that the lessons that we've learned through these scenarios really are kept at the forefront.
Yeah, I think you've touched on so many things there, but I think this whole sort of mantra of people resisting change and some of the dogma that I've certainly felt leading, large scale transformations, which is it's really hard and it's complex, and it is all of those things, but we've got so many stories now to point at last year where we can actually say, well, yes, it's hard, but we know we can do it. Like we've proven that we can do it. And yes, some of that was reacting more than sort of planned change, but I think it's going to be fascinating how the next few years play out. Lydia, I want to swing back around to you, because you go back to what were the observations of the impact of last year and how can we contribute and support and enable ongoing change. I think that's a really nice sort of segue from what Len was just talking about how do we keep this moving.
Sure. Well, I think the second part of that question, how can we as change advocates contribute to support and enable ongoing change into 2021, was wonderful for me. And those two key words are what we do in change. We support, we enable. We support and enable the business to deliver the change. And I believe personally that we need to shift the dial in language around change. I find there is still confusion around the term change management and what it means in many organizations. My mum struggles to explain to people what I do. Sometimes I don't even know what I do. A couple of years ago, I helped a Crown entity reinvent their whole entire change practice. And part of that was reviewing the language around change management so that it resonated with the organization. What did it actually mean for the people? Did they understand it? How could we better connect with it? And we ended up calling it the function, the entire practice, change enablement. And this resonated with the business and also meant that change managers, and that was to other people's points before, weren't lumped with leading the change, as it isn't their role. So for me, it's really important to use that in the new world. Management feels really outdated for the environment that we're in at the moment. If you look at the Oxford Dictionary, it defines it as a process of dealing with or controlling things or people. Yep, that sounds like fun, but it's a word that we've lived with for a long time, right? And it's what we're used to. And I'm not saying that our profession of change management needs to be renamed, but we're moving into an entirely different space. We need to reconnect and rehumanize our language and make it accessible. So words like enable, words like embed, sustain, support resonate so much more with what we do as a practice. But of course, it's about what's fit for purpose for the environment that you're in, or the organization that you're in at the moment. Collaboration involvement. It feels like an oxymoron to have collaboration and involvement without real connection in the virtual world. But in New Zealand, we have been fortunate enough to be able to get back to work. And for myself, I love that connection, brainstorming in a room with others, the water cooler talk, our Change Management Institute events. And what we've seen in New Zealand government is that agencies have been helping each other to work at home, sharing system setups, user guides, learnings of operating in a multimodal way. We're having to connect so much more, share more, and share freely. A sense of helping each other to survive. And part of that is leveraging off each other, developing collectively rather than reinventing individually. And I see that as something that will continue to grow further. And we should have done it earlier. Sector-wide co-creation and collaboration, and it saves taxpayers money, right? And we're all part of this ecosystem. And reinvention. So we know our plans can be derailed by something we can't even see, that tiny little virus. And we're going to be derailed again and again and again. And that refreezing of the future state is no longer valid in this world. And organizations need to be able to adapt, flex, and be pragmatic. I attended a conference a few years ago in the US where I saw Dr. Nadia Aksimbaya, who is the Chief Reinvention Officer of the Reinvention Academy, which is such a cool title. And she developed the Titanic syndrome. And the Titanic syndrome is a corporate disease in which organizations facing disruption create their own downfall through arrogance, excessive attachment to the past, or the inability to recognize the new and emerging reality. And disruptions like COVID have meant we've had to reinvent, and fast, especially if we want to survive. So this requires us to take a good look at our current methods for developing and enabling change. Things like, are we unpacking the right impacts? Are we still considering the right elements, and are they relevant for the world that we're in right now? So impacts on diversity and inclusion, well-being, working environments, climate change, how and what we are consuming and wasting, generational differences in thinking, flow on or secondary impacts. Are we doing work with meaning? So people these days are making really good choices on values of organizations and calling it out very publicly and quickly where they aren't displaying the right intentions. So we need to work with that, but deeply. Lots of organizations are doing the tick box compliance exercise of, oh, we got that in, so we are diverse and inclusive. And lastly, what I want to say is that to have people paddling in that waka in the same organizational direction, so not the COVID direction, but hopefully the organizational direction, we need to support them so they all have a paddle, they all have a life jacket, and they feel cared about. A true focus, and it's been mentioned before, on mental health and well-being will continue to play it out. It's been so hard for so many. So people before process. And there is a Māori proverb that is quite fitting for the current crisis that we find ourselves in. And it asks the question, what is the most important thing in the world? And the answer is he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It's the people, it's the people, it's the people. How do you implement change within your organization? You start with the people.
I couldn't not agree more. And I actually see a lot of similarities between the Change Management Institute and the Project Management Institute, and how we very often both get lumped with the managing label, and we are sort of the dumping ground for the hard work, or labeled with frameworks and processes, when actually what we're trying to achieve is something higher order. It is, about helping people be better. It's about helping organizations be better. It's about, making a difference in whatever that means in the industries that we are in. I know there's been a lot of positive feedback in the chat already. Sue said, what a great exercise to go through, Lydia. I completely agree that management gives the perception of doing. I know Sue's in the project space as well. So how do we continue the conversation with the leaders? And I think, Lydia, you started the session really well. And I have seen a lot of leaders step up, but I also know that a lot of them are being asked to change themselves. So I think there's this perception that change is often led top down, but what I'm starting to see is there's a lot of needs and changes being driven bottom up. We've seen that in, where people want to work. And I know quite a lot of leaders are grappling with, our people suddenly expect us to help them work from home, and that's going to force the leaders to change. So are you seeing much in the way of specifically helping leaders change rather than just teams?
It has been really tough for leaders, and there was a big trust element, right? So as soon as we went to virtual working, people were thrust into an environment of not having trust of the employees, and people were working harder. And that was a big shift for leaders. We, in a couple of my organizations, started developing kits and special teams sites for leaders to start unpacking some of those problems. And also the organization really had to ramp up quickly on guidance and talking to the leaders about how they would work collectively in the same way, so it's consistent across the organization with the leaders. Because at this time, some organizations don't like to spoon feed their leaders, but you kind of have to in these situations. What are the messages we're going to get out there? How are we going to talk to them? How are we focusing on well-being? So we had a lot of engagement surveys over that time, really short ones, about how do you feel about working from home? Are you feeling supported? Are you feeling valued? Do you have the right kit? And so those responses gave us the impetus to be able to react. And if people were saying, well, they felt that they didn't get trusted by their leaders, well, what do we need to do to enable our leaders to do that? And yeah, you're so right. We've got the individual hat with the leaders as well as leading. It's a big job, and not all leaders are natural at leading. A lot of people are, technical experts that have been moved up into management positions and really don't know how to lead. But again, people have stepped up and had to flex. And I think it's just been a bit of a roller coaster moving feast for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Len, if I could throw to you, I know historically change has sort of been, and I think Lydia, you touched on this sort of start and stop, or, you know, unfreeze and refreeze in terms of state, but we seem to be in this much more continuous flow of change now, where at least at the portfolio level, you know, the organizations aren't going to have, you know, a period where they're not changing in some way. So at that sort of macro level view, how do you see change management playing a role in that continuous change and adapting and flexibility?
I think one of the major things that we can do is to help build people's confidence into being able to take some of those stretch or flex or whatever terms you want to describe it in, that moves a little bit outside of their sort of common comfort zones. I guess to plagiarize, I would say that feedback is really the breakfast of champions in this sense. And the more that we can talk about how we define things like collaboration, what that means for people, and how you can actually not only get different people to speak up or encourage them to speak up, but also acknowledge what they've said. I mean, from my experience, one of the things that I've found is that it's quite easy to say co-creation, it's quite easy to say collaboration and to talk about it, but the experience of that can be completely different depending on what type of work you do. And leaders, to be more aware of that, can start to bring a bit of a different lens on the value that acknowledgement can play out to help people become more flexible. And I think flexibility is also one of those key concepts. The rigidity or the overly engineered, process-driven kind of top-heavy change management focus that has sometimes been brought to organizations really needs to be adapted to the existing culture. And to the points that were raised in previous conversation here, that really means tying into the languages the language that we use and how we describe what's actually taking place to move towards that more continuous sense of change.
Yeah, I think the continuous conversation, I think, is something I'd love to see, particularly leadership teams start to talk about. It's not necessarily any one change, it's the collective influence of many changes that needs to be considered. And how do we build this culture of this is just the way that we work, and this is who we are as an organization, that we are embracing, we have a culture of embracing this rather than resisting it. And I know that there's some organizations that are better than others at doing that, but maybe I'm just looking for sort of nirvana, because I think there's so many opportunities that came out of last year. I'm definitely a glass half full kind of person. Liam, I'm going to swing to you if I can, and touch on something you mentioned around, you know, being in the US and then coming to the UK, and I know that for many organizations where you have different cultures and maybe in the same workforce, I'm quite interested to see if you've seen a different reaction from a cultural perspective between, you know, how people in the US react versus the UK. I know we've got you know, a global audience online.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a lot of stuff happening in the US last year, and I think it's safe to say that my experience working in the US, it was very open. Communication was very open and free flowing. It wasn't as hierarchical as it is in the UK, and that's something that I'm now working through as well. You know, I worked for an organization for 8 years. I was in the US for three of those years. I built substantial relationships with the senior leaders. You know, we worked as a leadership team to transition to remote working, and again, to the points that have been raised on this call, you know, there were some leaders who were prepared and there were some leaders who weren't prepared. And when I say prepared, they didn't have the skills and they didn't know how to transition to a remote working. We're talking about individuals who have worked their way up an organization and may not have had those leadership capabilities, and, you know, they were technical experts. And it was a hard shift for them. It was a hard shift for them to transition to this whole new remote working and not sitting with their teams. You know, the culture with those particular leaders were effectively to have their employees, you know, in the office. So in general, I would say my experience working in the US, the change capability and the leadership, they were a lot more open to ideas and suggestions, and they were more authentic, and they would hold their hands up. You know, if something wasn't going particularly well, they were, and they sought feedback, and they did take that collaborative stance, and they were open to having employees come along to meetings and share insights and work on projects. Coming back into the UK, I would definitely say that in general, that the leaders are less, you know, are more so risk averse. There seems to be fear around egos and reputation, and that's pretty, you know, generalistic. There's, you know, there's talks about engaging employees, and I definitely see the engagement. However, there's one thing to seek feedback, and there's another thing doing something with that feedback, and that's not what I'm particularly seeing here in the UK, and that's something that I've witnessed in the past as well. So I think there are various cultural nuances across the UK and the US. I'm definitely hearing from other change professionals across the world very similar themes as well in terms of where they are. But ultimately, I do see the one commonality is that organizations are open and willing to build change capability, and they appreciate it more so now than ever. And, you know, I think there's been a silver lining with COVID to a point. And when I try and look at the positives, from a change profession, I would say that there is that focus now, and you know, change management is on the map, which I would consider a huge success as a result of something that's been so unfortunate. So leaders now appreciating the value of, you know, change professionals, and I've seen an increase in LinkedIn jobs as well. So when I moved back to the UK, there was, you know, contracted roles in the UK for change professionals, and it's just great to see that leaders are now talking change. And, you know, initially I thought it was lip service, but, you know, working with these leaders, I'm now seeing that they are genuinely interested and wanting to do what's best, not only for the organization, but for their people. So that's been a huge success for sure.
And it's a really positive note to finish this panel up. So thank you, everyone. Lydia, Len, Liam, and Cindy. I also want to extend my thanks to Steffi, the CEO of CMI, and Wendy Grimston also, who's on the call, for helping organize this panel and bringing such a global community together. If you are interested in the Change Management Institute, I really recommend their website. They've got heaps of great resources if you are exploring change management or interested in change management and stepping into that place as a profession. Even if you're a advocate of change and you're a change maker or a future shaper, there's some great resources on there to help you understand particularly how organizations change, but also how we personally react to change as well. So I really encourage you to check that out. If you're interested in being a member, they are a global organization, so wherever you are, go and check out your local CMI membership group. I know many people in the Change Management Institute here in Australia, and always have a wonderful time talking, mostly over wine, about where we're going and what change looks like where we are, at least here in Australia. So again, thank you to the panelists. It's been wonderful to hear your insights. I'm excited about what the last year means about the future for change. And I hope that we get to do many, many more things together, and it's onwards and upwards from here. So thank you again for everyone for joining and for